perfection by the mercy of superior authorities. This mercy does not depend on the qualifications of a devotee. By such mercy, even if a devotee is dumb, he can speak or write to glorify the Lord splendidly. Even if lame, he can cross mountains, and even if blind, he can see the stars in the sky. Omagana Trimanandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Umnitamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadha Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So read the translation once again. By remembering the lotus feet of the Panchatattva, a dumb man can become a poet, a lame man can cross mountains, and a blind man can see stars in the sky. So it's moving on to chapter 8 of the Madhya-lila. So the first 7 chapters were expanding on the first 14 verses of the Madhya-lila, and now Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is going to expand further on the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. So this chapter is describing in further detail about how Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was given the mercy of the Panchatattva and the Vaishnavas, so he could actually write the Caitanya Caritamrita. So I put a few pictures together for the PowerPoint to make it a bit more exciting. If we can find how this thing works. There we go. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who is the author of the Caitanya Caritamrita, is demonstrating to us as an acharya, as a teacher, about how to advance in devotional service, how to advance in our Krishna consciousness. And it's very important that we study the lives of these acharyas so we can cultivate the internal mood about how to become a Vaishnava, how to become a devotee. Because obviously being a devotee, it's not just all about the externals, it's more about the internal development within ourselves, how we're heart is becoming transformed and how we're developing devotional qualities. So by studying these acharyas, we can learn from them about how to cultivate this inner mood of Krishna consciousness. So I just found out this morning was Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj's disappearance day today. I think it was, yeah. So I would have elaborated a bit more on him as well, but I wasn't aware of it. But obviously Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is another great personality who we can meditate upon to develop our Krishna consciousness, and also we can pray to these personalities for their mercy. And what we'll talk about today is showing how Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami manifested that so wonderfully, giving us a wonderful example about how to get the mercy of the Vaishnavas and the mercy of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. So I'll just go back to some of my notes I have here. So there's not much really known about the earlier life of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. I heard a class where he was born apparently in about 1496, which would have been about 10 years after the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya appeared in the year 1486, and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami appeared 10 years later. He was initiated formally by Raghunath Das Goswami, and Raghunath Das Goswami is very famous as one of the 6 Goswamis, but also because he was a very renounced personality. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami also followed in the footsteps of his guru and was quite austere and quite renounced. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami ended up in Vrindavan. It's quite a wonderful story that we would have read in the last chapter about how he ended up living in Vrindavan. So he was already a great Vaishnava devotee, and there's a story that explains how he had a brother who didn't, who was also a devotee on one level, but he didn't have any faith in Lord Nityananda. He believed in Lord Caitanya, and he had full faith in Lord Caitanya, but he didn't have faith in Lord Nityananda. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was preaching to his brother, saying he had a misconception, it was a misunderstanding. It was a bit like the half-hen philosophy, saying, well, the philosophy of the half-hen is saying, well, we want the egg, but we don't have to keep feeding the hen, so if we cut off the head, we'll get the egg. But as we know, it doesn't work that way, that you have to feed the hen's head to get the egg. So Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda are non-different, like Krishna and Balaram are non-different. So there is no difference between Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya. Lord Nityananda obviously comes more in a mood of servitorship, as Lord Balaram does. But unfortunately, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's brother didn't have that understanding or that realisation, for whatever the case. So it's explained that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami rejected his brother because he wouldn't acknowledge the supremacy of Lord Nityananda. So a day or two after this had happened and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had in effect rejected his brother, then Lord Nityananda, we can see in the picture on the screen there, that Lord Nityananda appeared to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in a dream. And there's a very wonderful description in the Madhya-lila about this appearance that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains of Lord Nityananda in his dream. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains, that night Lord Nityananda appeared to me in a dream because of my good quality in chastising my brother. In the village of Jamatapur, which is near Nahati, Lord Nityananda appeared to me in a dream. Apparently this village is still there, and rumour has it that there is a pair of sandals there that belong to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. I don't know if anyone's been there before, but apparently this village is still there to this day where he had this dream, and you can take darshan of these sandals there in this village. I fell at his feet offering my obeisances, and then he placed his own lotus feet upon my head. Arise, get up, he told me again and again. Upon rising, I was greatly astonished to see his beauty. He had a glossy blackish complexion, and his tall, strong, heroic stature made him seem like Cupid himself. He had beautifully formed hands, arms and legs, and eyes like lotus flowers. He wore a silk cloth with a silk turban on his head. He wore golden earrings on his ears and golden armlets and bangles. He wore tinkling anklets on his feet and a garland of flowers around his neck. His body was anointed with sandalwood pulp, and he was nicely decorated with tilak. His movements surpassed those of a maddened elephant. His face was more beautiful than millions upon millions of moons, and his teeth were like pomegranate seeds because of his chewing betel. His body moved to and fro, right and left, for he was absorbed in ecstasy. He chanted, "Krishna, Krishna," in a deep voice. His red stick moving in his hand, he seemed like a maddened lion. All around the four sides of his feet were bumblebees. His devotees, dressed like cowherd boys, surrounded his feet like so many bees and also chanted, "Krishna, Krishna," absorbed in ecstatic love. Some of them played horns and flutes, and others danced and sang. Some of them offered betel nuts, and others waved chamra fans about him. Thus I saw such opulence in Lord Nityananda's Swarup. His wonderful form, qualities and pastimes are all transcendental. I was overwhelmed with transcendental ecstasy, not knowing anything else. Then Lord Nityananda smiled and spoke to me as follows. My dear Krishnadas, do not be afraid. Go to Vrindavan, for there you will attain all things. After saying this, he directed me toward Vrindavan by waving his hand. Then he disappeared with his associates. I fainted and fell to the ground. My dream broke, and when I regained consciousness, I saw that morning had come. I thought about what I had seen and heard and concluded that the Lord had ordered me to proceed to Vrindavan at once. That very second I started from Vrindavan, and by his mercy I reached there in great happiness. All glory to Lord Nityananda Balaram, by whose mercy I have attained the shelter and the transcendental abode of Vrindavan. All glory to the merciful Lord Nityananda, by whose mercy I have attained shelter at the lotus feet of Sri Rup and Sri Sanatan. By his mercy I have attained the shelter of the great personality Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, and by his mercy I have found the refuge of Sri Swarup Damodar. By the mercy of Sanatana Goswami, I have learned the final conclusions of devotional service. And by the grace of Sri Rupa Goswami, I have tasted the highest nectar of devotional service. All glory to the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda, by whose mercy I have attained Sri Radha Govinda. So, here we can see that's the internal mood of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, how he is fully dependent upon the mercy of these great personalities, the Goswamis, and also dependent on the mercy of the Panchatattva. And another quality that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is very famous for, and when you read the Caitanya Caritamrita, you pick this up quite clearly, was his extreme humility. And obviously Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wasn't putting on a show of his humility, but he was genuinely a humble person. So as we know that in the Shikshastakam prayers we meditate on that verse that one has to be more tolerant than a tree, more humble than a blade of grass. So he's definitely a great personality to meditate upon, to develop this quality of humility. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, after glorifying Lord Nityananda and the great devotees, he talks about himself. He says, I am more sinful than Jagai and Madai, and even lower than the worms and stool. Anyone who hears my name, it's kind of, when you're reading it, it's kind of like, really? Anyone who hears my name loses the results of his pious activities. Anyone who utters my name becomes sinful. Who in this world but Nityananda could show his mercy to such an abominable person as me? Because he's intoxicated by ecstatic love and is an incarnation of mercy, he does not distinguish between the good and bad. He's talking about Lord Nityananda. He delivers all those who fall down before him. Therefore he has delivered such a sinful and fallen person as me. Although I am sinful and I am the most fallen, he has conferred upon me the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Goswami. So we can see this example of wonderful humility being exhibited by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. More sinful than Jagai and Madai, lower than the worm and stool. Anyone who hears my name loses the results of his pious activities. Quite exemplary of his humility. But once again, we can pray to these personalities to cultivate these qualities. I remember Bhakti Swami gave a class in Melbourne one time many years ago. And he said, in this age of Kali Yuga, everything is decreasing. Our age, our human qualities, our longevity, but there is one thing increasing, and that is ahankara, false ego. So the only thing increasing in Kali Yuga is our false ego, or our wonderful perception we have of ourselves. So to develop this humility is quite a meditation, actually. And obviously we can meditate upon this humility of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So after Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had this dream of Lord Nityananda appearing to him, he said that very second he woke up, then he left to Vrindavan. So he resided in Vrindavan in his older age. He was there at the time that the Goswamis were there, so he had Sangha with all of the Goswamis, Raghunath Das Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami, and as I mentioned, he took initiation from Raghunath Das Goswami, and he was residing at Radha Kund next to Raghunath Das Goswami's Bhajan Kutir. I think I've got a picture here of it. Yeah, if you look on the picture on the right hand side, that's Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Bhajan Kutir at Radha Kund. So when you do Radha Kund, Shamakund, Parakram, you can go to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Bhajan Kutir, and there's a really nice old sadhu who lives there at the moment, and he's very, very sweet, and he's very, very accommodating, and very happy to see the ISKCON devotees come and visit him there, and he'll give you some prasadam because they do offerings there every day to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, so they'll give you some of his prasadam. So next time you go there, it's a very nice place to meditate. I'm pretty sure that's the place where his kutir is where Radharani takes her afternoon bath at Radha Kund. So it's a very, very holy place. So It's said that these personalities always reside there. So when you go on these parikrams to these holy dhams, these personalities are present in their bhajan kuters and their samadhis. So you can really go quite deeply into your meditation upon these personalities. So while he was residing in Vrindavan, at that time the devotees were hearing the Caitanya Bhagavat written by Vrindavan Das Thakur. So every day Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami would hear from Raghunath Das Goswami, because Raghunath Das Goswami had a lot of a personal association with Lord Chaitanya. So every day Raghunath Das Goswami would in the morning give discourses and talks about the different pastimes he had observed with Lord Chaitanya. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was meditating on these pastimes and also hearing the Caitanya Bhagavat by Vrindavan Das Thakur. Vrindavan Das Thakur's Caitanya Bhagavat focuses a lot on the earlier years of Lord Chaitanya. And at that time there was no written document about Lord Chaitanya's later pastimes. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was petitioned by the Vrindavan devotees to write the Caitanya Caritamrita. So he was a kavi. A kavi means a great poet. He was well known for being a great poet. So we can see when we read the Caitanya Caritamrita, like the ability that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had as a very wonderful poet. So he was requested by the Vrindavan devotees to pen the Caitanya Caritamrita. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains that in Vrindavan there was many great devotees, all of whom desired to hear the last pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. By their mercy, all these devotees ordered me to write the last pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because of their order only, although I am shameless, I've attempted to write this Caitanya Caritamrita. So it's Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami also exemplifies the mood of a devotee when they're actually writing about the pastimes of the Lord, when they're writing Vaishnava literature. You have to be empowered to do it. In a sense, with any service that you do, you actually have to do it in the right consciousness and to do it nicely for Krishna's pleasure. You have to actually ask the mercy of the devotees, the mercy of the Vaishnavas and the mercy of the deities, so you can do the service nicely. And whatever service it may be, obviously in the context of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he was a great literary author. But whatever our service is, we can pray to the mercy of the devotees to do that service nicely, whether it's distributing books or whether you're doing pujari services or cooking prasadam, to do it nicely in the right mood and to be empowered to do that service, you have to do it in the right mood, which is becoming dependent on the mercy of the Vaishnavas and the mercy of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. So in the purport to Madhya-lila Chapter 8, Text 72, Prabhupada explains that to write about the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not an ordinary endeavour. Unless one is empowered by the higher authorities or advanced devotees, one cannot write transcendental literature, for all such literature must be above suspicion, or in other words, it must have none of the defects of conditioned souls, namely mistakes, illusions, cheating, and imperfect sense perceptions. The words of Krishna and of the disciplic succession that carries the orders of Krishna are actually authoritative. To be empowered to write transcendental literature is a privilege in which a writer can take pride. As a humble Vaishnava, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, being thus empowered, felt very much ashamed that it was he who was to narrate the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, when he was requested by the Vaishnavas in Vrindavan to write this Caitanya Caritamrita, in his humility, he went to the Madan Mohan deity and he began praying to the Madan Mohan deity, saying, please give me the intelligence and empower me so I can write about these pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. And it's explained that when he was in this Madan Mohan Mandir, the garland of Madan Mohan fell off him at the time, and the pujaris gave that to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, and the devotees were very, very, very happy and were chanting Haribol, because they could see it's explained, if you're in front of the deities and you're having darshan and something, you may be, petitioning the Lord for something, and then something may fall from the altar. It's a sign from Krishna that he's reciprocating with you. It's an auspicious sign, actually, that what you're meditating upon, Krishna's hearing you. Whether he manifests what you're wanting or not, it's a different thing, but he's hearing you. So there's so many wonderful examples of that. Was it in Jagannath Puri when Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati was a young child, and then in Jagannath Puri, where Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house was, the cart would go past when they did the Rath Yatra, and they brought Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati in front of Lord Jagannath when he was a young child, and it's explained the garland came off Lord Jagannath onto Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. So many wonderful examples of how the Lord reciprocates wonderfully with his devotees this way. So you can just meditate on that point, that if you're in front of the altar and something falls off, Krishna's hearing you. He knows everything. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was enthused this way to write the Caitanya Charitamrita, because he had simultaneously the mercy and blessings of the Vaishnavas, and he petitioned Madan Mohan to be able to write this wonderful book. So this is the process when you're writing about Krishna or glorifying Krishna in written form or poetry. You have to pray for that. So in the purport to text Madhya-lila chapter 8, text 73, Prabhupada explains, a Vaishnava always follows the orders of Guru and Krishna. Sri Caitanya Charitamrita was written by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami by their mercy. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami considered all the devotees that have been mentioned to be his preceptor gurus or spiritual masters, and Madan Mohan, Sri Madan Mohan Vigraha, is Krishna himself. Thus he took permission from both of them, and when he received the mercy of both Guru and Krishna, he was able to write this great literature, Sri Caitanya Charitamrita. This example should be followed. Anyone who attempts to write about Krishna must first take permission from the spiritual master and Krishna. Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, and the spiritual master is his direct external representative. Thus Krishna is situated anta bahi, within and without. One must first become a pure devotee by following the strict regulative principles and chanting 16 rounds daily, and when one thinks that he is actually on the Vaishnava platform, he must then take permission from the spiritual master, and that permission must also be confirmed by Krishna from within his heart. Srila Prabhupada also, there were many times that Prabhupada said that Krishna was telling him what to write. He called his purports his devotional ecstasies, because he said that Krishna was dictating to him what to write in his purports. I think I was reading in maybe it was in Hari Sori's Transcendental Diary, I think it was, where Prabhupada was being interviewed, and the interviewer was asking about how he had written his books, and Prabhupada said, well, Krishna tells me what to write, and then one of Prabhupada's disciples interjected and said, well, what Prabhupada means is that Krishna gives him inspiration to what to write, and Prabhupada said, no, Krishna is telling me what to write. He's telling me what to write. So we can see that when you're empowered by Krishna and the Vaishnava Parampara, then Krishna will come to you and tell you how to write these things. So we can, when we're reading these purports, we can meditate that this is Krishna dictating to Srila Prabhupada, how to write his Bhaktivedanta purports. In fact, Prabhupada would even like reading his own Krishna book, because he would say that, no, these are not my words. This is Krishna speaking. And we also find, even in a mundane sense, we can find so many examples of people who are empowered, obviously, by the super soul within their heart, how to do wonderful things. Like we find famous musicians like Mozart and Beethoven would say that it wasn't them where their compositions were coming from, it was coming from somewhere else. So as devotees, you understand it was Savasya Chaham Priti Sanivistu Mata Smriti Ganam Pohanamcha, that Krishna says that I'm situated in the heart of all living entities, and from me comes knowledge, remembrance and forgetfulness. So everything is coming from Krishna. So the Vaishnavas understand that, which is why they're petitioning and praying to the Vaishnavas and Lord Caitanya for his mercies to empower them to do their service. And we can see with today's verse that, which is why Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is elaborating on this point he's making, that by remembering the lotus feet of the Panchatattva, a dumb man can become a poet, a lame man can cross mountains, and a blind man can see stars in the sky. So it's not just prose or poetic niceness he's throwing out, but that's actually what he means. And we can see with the example of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he passed away in 1591, maybe about just after he'd finished writing the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So at that stage he was in his 90s. I think he was about 95 years old when he passed away. So he was actually in his 90s when he was writing this Chaitanya Charitamrita. And you can see when you go through it that he talks about how his physical condition, like he's an invalid, he's almost blind, but still he's managing to write this Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he's saying to me, this is a very wonderful thing. So we can see that through the mercy of Krishna, that a dumb man can become a poet, a lame man can cross mountains. Anything is possible with Krishna's mercy. Anything is possible. Yeah, so further on in this chapter, text 78, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami elaborates, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is not my writing, but the dictation of Sri Madan Mohan. My writing is like the repetition of a parrot. And then the purport Prabhupada elaborates, this should be the attitude of all devotees. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead recognises a devotee, he gives him intelligence and dictates how he may go back home, back to Godhead. This is confirmed in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 10. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I'll give the understanding by which they can come to me. The opportunity to engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord is open to everyone, because every living entity is constitutionally a servant of the Lord. To engage in the service of the Lord is the natural function of the living entity, but because he's covered by the influence of Maya, the material energy, he thinks it to be a very difficult task. But if he places himself under the guidance of a spiritual master and does everything sincerely, immediately the Lord, who is situated within everyone's heart, dictates how to serve him, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam. The Lord gives this direction, and thus the devotee's life becomes perfect. Whatever a pure devotee does is done by the dictation of the Supreme Lord. This is confirmed by the author of Chaitanya Charitamrita, that whatever he wrote was written under the direction of the Sri Madan Mohan Didi. So it's quite a, in one sense, it's maybe quite a foreign concept that to attain success in something is that you're dependent upon the mercy or the grace or the blessings of someone else. And in Western culture, we're all sort of like the rugged individual types, where through our own intellect and our own prowess, and we will achieve things. But we can find in spiritual life, it's a very different type of consciousness that we have to cultivate, is that we're trying to cultivate that mood of dependency and requesting and petitioning the Lord and the Vaishnavas to give us their mercy and their grace and their blessings so that we can be successful. So it takes a bit of time to readjust to that way of thinking, because it's actually quite a foreign concept. I mean, probably talking to myself, but it's quite a foreign way of thinking that, you know, if I'm going to be spiritually successful, it's not up to me and, you know, chanting 1,000,000 rounds a day and doing all these things, but we have to actually know how to get the mercy of the Lord and get the mercy of the Vaishnavas if we want to make advancement. And this is the point that Prabhupada was elaborating on in the purport today, that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami stresses Kripa Siddha, perfection by the mercy of superior authorities. So that's a big aspect of our development in our Krishna consciousness, is becoming Kripa Siddhas, or making advancement, attaining perfection through the mercy of the Vaishnavas and the mercy of the devotees. And Prabhupada elaborates here that this mercy does not depend on the qualifications of a devotee. By such mercy, even if a devotee is dumb, he can speak or write or glorify the Lord splendidly. So we can see that to advance in bhakti yoga, it's not based on your academic qualifications and your intellect and your physical prowess and all these things. It's not really dependent upon those things at all, as we can see with the example of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, that even though materially speaking he was an old man, he was described himself as an invalid, he was going blind and had so many health issues, he was still, despite all the obstacles, was able to write this Caitanya Caritamrita. And also we have the example of Srila Prabhupada, the challenges and difficulties and obstacles that he had to go through just to come to the West, just to get to the West. He had how many heart attacks? 2 or 3 heart attacks on the Jaladuta, seasickness, so many severe austerities Prabhupada went to when he was in his 70s just to come to the West. But similarly, just as Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was empowered, Srila Prabhupada was also empowered as well. When we read his poems he wrote on the Jaladuta, Makine Bhagavat Dham, when he's petitioning the Lord for his mercy and just saying, make me dance as you will, do with me as you like. You've brought me here to this place for some reason, so if you want me to preach Krishna consciousness, that's up to you. So we can see that our bhakti and our development of bhakti is not dependent upon our material situation at all. Like sometimes people, when we preach to people, sometimes they think, it's something I'll do when I'm older. When I'm older, I'll take up this Krishna consciousness. But now I'm busy with my material activities and I'm working and I have mortgages and bills and all these things, so many responsibilities. But when I'm older, I'll take to bhakti. But of course, bhakti is not dependent upon that at all. And of course, we never know when we're going to die. Padam vipadam natesham. That's explained that in the material world there is danger at every step. But one who has taken shelter of Krishna, then all these dangers are reduced to like the water in a cow's hoof print. So whatever our material situation is, the urgency is to take to this Krishna consciousness and make advancement. It's not that we want to stay, stagnant, you could say, in our Krishna consciousness, but we want to be pushing forward constantly with our development of our spiritual life. So this is why we have to study the lives of these acharyas about how to make this advancement. Sometimes people say, I just feel like I'm not advancing, I just feel like I'm stuck where I am, but we have to know how to apply the process to make that advancement. So obviously one of those things is knowing how to beg for the mercy and developing this humility, such as we see with Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So further in the context of writing literature, and Prabhupada actually encouraged all of his followers to write. So that book by Vaisheshekha Prabhu is Our Family Business. I don't know if you've read that. You're familiar with Our Family Business? It's a book the BBT put out, and it's written by Vaisheshekha Prabhu, talking about how printing books and writing literature is our family business as Vaishnavas, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. That's what we do. We're following Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Jiva Goswami, all these prolific authors. So Prabhupada encouraged us to write as well. So Prabhupada explains, elaborating further in that context about writing about Krishna, transcendent literature that strictly follows the Vedic principles and the conclusions of the Puranas and Pancharatrika Vidhi can be written only by a pure devotee. It is not possible for a common man to write books on bhakti, for his writing will not be effective. He may be a very great scholar and may be expert in presenting literature in flowery language, but this is not at all helpful in understanding transcendental literature. Even if transcendental literature is written in faulty language, it is acceptable if it is written by a devotee, whereas so-called transcendental literature written by a mundane scholar, even if it is a very highly polished literary presentation, cannot be accepted. And this is an important point Prabhupada makes here. The secret in a devotee's writing is that when he writes about the pastimes of the Lord helps him. He does not write himself. Since a devotee writes in the service of the Lord from within gives him so much intelligence that he sits down near the Lord and goes on writing books. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami confirms that what Vrindavan Das Thakur wrote, who wrote the Chaitanya Bhagavat, was actually spoken by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he simply repeated it. The same holds true for Chaitanya Charitamrita. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wrote Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in his old age and an invalid condition, but as such a sublime literature that Srila Bhaktisandra Saraswati Goswami Maharaj used to say, the time will come when people of the world will learn Bengali to read Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. We are trying to present Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in English and do not know how successful it will be, but if one reads the original Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali, he will relish increasing ecstasy in devotional service. So there you go, we all have to learn Bengali so we can read Chaitanya Charitamrita. So, in conclusion to what we're discussing, this is the take-home from the whole thing, is the mercy of the Vaishnavas and the Supreme Lord is the secret to success in all aspects of devotional service. So, Mukam Karachi Vachalam Pangam Langa Tagirim Yakripa Tamham Bande Shigurum Dinatarinam. I offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, the deliverer of the fallen souls. His mercy turns the dumb into eloquent speakers and enables the lame to cross mountains. So, obviously this verse is where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami took his inspiration from today's verse. So, as I was saying, if we look at Yamuna Mataji, if you're familiar with Yamuna, who's a great disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who's written a book, Unalloyed, which is highly worth reading. She was a famous cook as well, who wrote Lord Krishna's Cuisine, which is a very big cookbook, and it was a big labour of love for her to write that book, but it's explained that whenever she entered into the kitchen, she'd always chant Om Agana Tramarandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chaksho Umnitamyana Tasmai Shuguravena Maha. So she was meditating that, she was asking for the mercy so she could be empowered to cook for Krishna. Whether it's doing deity worship, like Prabhupada would say that when the pujari is dressing the deity, it's actually Krishna dressing himself through the pujari. So when we're doing pujari services, we want to be praying for Krishna to become a better instrument so he can dress himself so nicely through the pujari. Also distributing books as well. We can find so many examples of great devotees who have become empowered book distributors, who have distributed thousands and thousands and thousands of books, probably millions of books, like Vaisheshekha Prabhu and Navina Narada, and so many great devotees who have been empowered to become great distributors. And a lot of them will say it's because they're praying, constantly praying for the mercy of Lord Chaitanya to become empowered to do that service, so Lord Chaitanya can act through them to do that service. So this is the right consciousness to be developing, that whatever your service may be, don't ever see it as a mundane thing. Prabhupada said that there's no difference between someone sweeping the floor or sweeping the courtyard and being on the altar doing pujari service to the deity, because on the absolute platform there is no difference. They're devotional service. So whatever the service may be, we're wanting to become empowered in that service to do it very, very nicely for Lord Krishna. So we have to ask for that mercy from the Vaishnavas, ask for their blessings, and also ask Prabhupada, and we can ask the deity Krishna as well. Please give me the intelligence how to do this service so nicely. So that's the internal mood, so nicely exemplified by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So now we'll stop. It's 8:30, so everyone's hungry. Anyone want to say anything or add anything? Or
thank you for the wonderful class.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
there's arguments online about usual stuff, the book changes and stuff, So there's people who are for it, and there's devotees for it, and devotees against it, What's your comment on that? Just why information.
In the context of?
In the context of what should be one's position. Do we take a neutral position? Do we take sides when something like this happens? Because I've so far maintained a neutral position, and it's taken the trouble that I see sometimes in private circles there's discussions and arguments, back and forth.
Well, the main thing to avoid is just offending devotees. I mean, because a lot of those things, they turn ad hominem instead of dealing with the issues. And of course, there may be issues there that need to be addressed, but when that sort of devolves into ad hominem attacks, then you're crossing into Vaishnava aparad. And if you don't want to make advancement, that's how not to do it, by offending devotees. Lord Caitanya called that the mad elephant offence. So, when it's devolving into situations like that, when you're becoming offensive and developing a critical mentality towards devotees, that's not healthy. Because we can see with Vaishnavas, they try to see the good in everybody. They're not thinking about the faults and this is wrong with that one and that one doesn't agree with me and this and that. We're trying to cultivate the mood of seeing the good in everybody, seeing the good in the devotees and meditating on that. So it's very, very easy in Kali Yuga, unfortunately, that we go into that default, into that fault-finding mentality, and it's not a healthy place to be. So so sure there may be issues that need to be addressed, and I'm sure that they will be addressed within time in a sensible Vaishnava way, but not healthy if it's crossing the line into Vaishnava aparad, because that's how you're not going to make advancement. So we talked about today about how to make advancement, and that's the opposite, how to not make advancement. So got to be very careful with devotees, because you're not dealing with ordinary people at all. I know that we see each other every day generally, and we get over familiar with each other and take each other for granted to a degree. But we have to be careful when we're dealing with the devotees that they're not ordinary people at all. So we always have to keep that in mind as well.
For those of you who don't know, the DVT and GDC formed a panel of 7 devotees in the beginning of 2020, and their task is to go over any proposed changes to Srila Prabhupada's books, examine it very carefully. And we've spent almost a year in developing a principles document, which is now being soon to be hopefully ratified by the DVT. So a lot of devotees do jump on the bandwagon of the chanting Prabhupada's book, but actually when it's examined very carefully, and we did a lot of research into this subject, and Prabhupada did give instructions to make changes for force and clarity. And of course then there's the subject of Asha Prayoga, which is Prayoga, you don't change the words of the spiritual masters. So it's a very fine balance with working out what is an acceptable change and what's not an acceptable change. But I think a lot of devotees do, from a place of lack of information, not particularly informed, they're changing Prabhupada's book, how can they do that? But it's not exactly like that at all. And 2 years ago they had a very large symposium in America between a lot of the scholars in academia and a lot of our Vaishnava scholars as well, and the DVT. And one of the most outspoken critics of the DVT changes, when they went through all of the large amount of chapters of the DVT and showed where changes have been, they actually agreed with most of them. That the DVT is considered to be revision of the panels in that very delicate balance between, because Prabhupada did not want mistakes in his books in terms of, grammar and punctuation, things like that, of course. So, it is taken very, very seriously by the bigger team. I would suggest to devotees to become informed first before you, jump onto that platform where devotees are thinking, how many changes have been in Prabhupada's books, and everything has a very strict audit trail. So we can see from the original transcript to the 1972 edition and then to the 1983 edition. All of any of those changes are there, and the leadership of the panels examining all of those very, very carefully. So it's very reassuring for devotees. So I just wanted to mention about that.
It's a good point. I mean, it does become an issue from time to time. I know that there's a book, the publication that came out by the BBT maybe in the 1990s about responsible publishing, which goes into a lot of, I don't know if you've seen that one, but it goes into a lot of the so-called changes and edits, and just shows that it's actually quite chased back to Prabhupada's original transcribes actually. So the current Bhagavad Gita is, closer to Prabhupada's original transcribes, because when they transcribed it, the English was not understood, or I think it was Gargamuni, one of the original editors, was using another Mayavad edition of Bhagavad Gita to help with the translation work, or Hayagriva, sorry. Yeah.
He just used that to extrapolate some of the verses.
And I don't think, if Prabhupada's books have been changed so much that obviously they have no potency, therefore they wouldn't be making devotees anymore, but obviously they're making plenty of devotees around the world, so I don't think that the conclusion or the essence has been lost at all, what Prabhupada was presenting.
Yeah, and there haven't been that radical change.
No.
And as you were saying, in other editions of, for example, the Gita, that has been taken in a lot of places where things have dropped off from the original translation due to inexperience of the devotees in those very early days, and they had a lot of things working against them in a way. The dictaphone process, certain words would just be, when Prabhupada put the turn dictaphone off and then on again, a word or two would be dropped out. So, the body shouldn't lose faith in the devotee work.
Yeah. I know that there's maybe a revised edition for a Srimad Bhagavatam set to come out as well, maybe in the future. They're working on that at the moment, apparently, from what I hear.
That Gita is called the Motel Gita, and that's for distribution in all of the motels in India. That will be just from scans of the current Gita. And Srimad Bhagavatam, we started work on the Srimad Bhagavatam, but then we stopped at the request of the BBT to start work on the Bhagavad Gita, because the new one will be published in, I think, a year or two next year for the, I think it's the 50th anniversary. So that edition that's being printed very soon, the Gita, that's from the current scans, because they need to get those editions out into the different restaurants.
Okay, that's a good idea, isn't it? Good initiative. Great.
I think it's like the Blues initiative.
Now I guess we better stop. Can we stop? All right. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami ki jai, Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai.